Murdo Fraser, this long-standing member of the Scottish Conservative Party, a prominent figure who wants to be the leader of the Scottish Conservatives, is known for his consistent opposition to LGBTQ plus rights, particularly to same-sex marriage. He's not the only one, of course. His stance, he says, is deeply rooted not in prejudice but in his religious beliefs, which he openly cites as the foundation of his views. And in a recent campaign launch, well, you remember, of course, the religious views of the We Free and the problems there. But Fraser openly cites his religion as the foundation of his views, and in a recent campaign launch he's reiterated that his position on same-sex marriage remains unchanged since he voted against it a decade ago. And he says, "I am a Christian. I take particular views on what marriage should be. That's how I voted, and I haven't changed my mind on that." Well, there we are, you see. All I would encourage people to do is to go back and look at my video on Gay, What Would God Say, where I examine the various texts from Leviticus and from the New Testament in context, and come to the conclusion with I hope, a clear analysis of these texts. It's quite a long video. You can find it in 3 different parts, or I put it all together, and I'll leave a link after this video in the links at the end of the video. But I've come to the conclusion that not only does Christianity not endorse these prohibitions on homosexuality, but it encourages a commitment towards relationships rather than a prohibition of marriage. Christianity is about positivity rather than negativity, and Murdo Fraser seems to have misinterpreted what he's talking about. So he should have a look at my video. His political influence within the Scottish Conservative Party is considerable, having run for leadership positions and held various roles, including that of the party's finance. So he's not an inconsiderable character. And his opposition to same-sex marriage is consistent with his broader views on LGBTQ plus issues. In 2012, he criticised a diversity survey by Police Scotland that included questions about sexual orientation and gender identity, questioning the relevance of such information in the context of crime fighting. And this incident exemplifies his broader scepticism towards policies and initiatives aimed at promoting LGBTQ plus inclusivity. And his stance on LGBTQ plus rights has not been limited to same-sex marriage. In 2020, he led efforts to restrict access to puberty blockers for transgender youth in Scotland, and in 2022 he voted against the Gender Recognition Reform Scotland Bill, which aimed to simplify the legal process for gender transition. Fraser's consistent opposition to LGBTQ plus rights has made him a controversial figure, particularly among those who advocate for greater equality and inclusivity. His stance on LGBTQ plus issues can be compared to the stance of individuals in Westminster, like, for example, Andrea Leadsom, the former Conservative MP, actually at one point my own constituency MP, a person who doesn't really like listening. She likes to hector, and God forbid that you should go to one of her constituency surgery meetings because you won't get a word in edgeways. A prominent political figure in Westminster who stood for election as leader in Westminster as well, and failed because she ridiculed Theresa May for not having children. Leadsom, like Fraser, has expressed reservations herself about same-sex marriage, and in fact quite famously voted twice, once for and once against it, walking through 2 doors at the same time, being in 2 places at once, not unlike God. And So her opposition to the LGBTQ plus issues were framed differently in 2013, citing concerns about the potential impact on religious freedom. She argued that while she supported civil partnerships for same-sex couples, marriage should remain a distinct institution traditionally reserved for heterosexual unions. This nuanced position reflects a similar balancing act between personal religious convictions and public policy that Fraser himself attempts to navigate. However, while Leadsom eventually accepted the legal reality of same-sex marriage and adapted her rhetoric over time, Fraser has remained steadfast in his opposition, demonstrating a more rigid adherence to his original views, and this difference highlights the broader spectrum within the Conservative Party regarding LGBTQ+ rights, with some members like Leadsom evolving their views in response to changes in society, while others like Fraser maintaining their original intransigent position. Other Conservatives who voted against same-sex marriage, like, for example, Jacob Rees-Mogg, also grounded their opposition in religious beliefs. Mogg, a devout Catholic, opposed the legislation on the grounds that it was incompatible with his faith. Like Fraser, Rees-Mogg's opposition was rooted in a deeply held belief in the traditional definition of marriage. However, Rees-Mogg, much like Leadsom, has tended to be more measured in his public statements since the law's passage, focusing on other political issues while maintaining his personal and private convictions. And Fraser's continued opposition to same-sex marriage, even in the face of significant social change, reflects a segment of the Conservative base that remains resistant to LGBTQ+ rights. And this resistance, however, is increasingly at odds with the broader public opinion in Scotland, where support for marriage equality and LGBTQ+ rights has grown significantly over the past decade. Criticism from figures like Labour MSP Paul O'Kane, who is in a same-sex marriage, underscores the social and political divide on this issue, and O'Kane's rebuke of Fraser highlights the progress that has been made in terms of equality and the resistance that remains among some Conservative politicians. Fraser's candidacy for the Scottish Conservative leadership and his public stance on LGBTQ+ rights continue to provoke debate within the party and beyond. And his views contrast sharply with those of his competitors, Megan Gallagher and Russell Findlay, who, while not necessarily champions of LGBTQ+ rights, have taken more nuanced and less publicly rigid, prejudiced stances. For instance, Gallagher's previous criticisms of LGBTQ Youth Scotland indicate some reservations about the organisation's work, but do not represent a full-scale opposition to LGBTQ+ rights in the way that Fraser's positions do. Murdo Fraser's opposition to same-sex marriage and LGBTQ+ rights is emblematic of a broader Conservative tradition that prioritises religion and traditional belief and traditional values. And those, as I hope becomes clear if you look at my longer talk on this, those traditional values change with time. And while his stance has garnered support from certain segments of the electorate, it's also led to significant criticism and alienation from those who view equality and inclusivity as non-negotiable aspects of modern society. His steadfastness, his stubbornness, particularly when compared to figures like Andrea Leadsom, who've shown more willingness to adapt or at least to mute their prejudice, highlights the ongoing tension within the Conservative elite between tradition and progress, and the desire to regain control and to be in government again, because it's not going to continue while stubbornly clinging to views which are outdated, is it, really?